All right, ready to rock and roll, everybody? Let's get the call to order the meeting of the Housing Planning and Development Committee for October 16, 2023. First, I'd like to move that we approve the minutes from the July 17, 2023 meeting of the committee.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? And the ayes have it. That brings us to the two remaining items on our agenda. One is communication that I put on the docket regarding affordable housing. To continue the committee's inquiry, essentially, and also to have the opportunity to hear from the administration about the Affordable Housing Scenario Planning Action Report that we see on screen that the administration conducted in conjunction with the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. So that's one item. We've also got another item, Ordinance 20-2023, the sale of city-owned properties ordinance, which would put 6 different properties. One family, I think they're all one-family home properties that the former Lakewood Hospital Association owned on Bell and St. Charles. Well, there's also one. Okay, 5 of the 6 are in that category. One vacant parcel on Westlake Avenue, and the city wants to, or rather, the Director of Planning and Development and the mayor proposed to solicit proposals from a licensed real estate broker to market the properties. Director Leininger, is there a time sensitivity to that second item, the Ordinance 20-2023? We don't have a lot of time tonight, so I'm trying to fit in traffic cop our agenda, that's all.
I'm hopeful we can move that from committee. This is a sensitive topic with our insurance carrier, and it's a lengthy process to go through and solicit services of a real estate agent and then list the properties. So there is some time sensitivity to it.
Okay, well, we'll get to that. Because this is an opportunity, perhaps, to address affordable housing with those city-owned properties, let's take the first item on the agenda first, which is the study on screen. Council members, before we invite the planning director to give us an overview, committee members and Mr. Baker, do you guys have any opening comments or thoughts or questions that you want to frame up? Councilwoman Keppel?
Thanks. I do have a few questions just from going through it, but is the plan for a presentation, or is this more of a question and answer form?
Well, good question. If we can do a mini presentation, that'd be ideal, so that leaves time for Q&A and then the second item on the agenda. So is that agreeable, Director Leininger?
Yeah, I'll follow your lead, Councilman.
Okay.
I mean, if I can skip some of the formalities and we can just kind of jump into the executive summary of the report, is probably the best place to go.
Right.
But it's up to you. I'll follow your lead.
Probably that. Did that answer your question? Okay. And Councilman Baker, any thoughts to open with? Okay. Yeah, Director, so if you could just recap, this report came to us, looks like in May of this year, after something like 6 or 9 months of study from some grant funds that were acquired last year. You, together with the institutes listed on screen here, conducted the analysis. And maybe you could give us the walkthrough now. Sure. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So yes, Mr. Chairman, as you noted, we were contacted by the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy about some innovative planning scenario activities that they were developing. This happened back in the spring of 2022 when they reached out and were soliciting proposals from, or letters of interest essentially from communities from around the country. We did have expressed an interest and we submitted a topic idea of affordable housing, or housing affordability, if you will, in our community, since that was a conversation that was top of mind from ongoing conversations within the city administration, within the various groups within the community, and of course with city council and some of the committee meetings that were taking place regarding that topic. We were ultimately then selected by Lincoln Institute as a pilot project to help take a look at exploratory scenario planning is what it's actually called. And what Lincoln Institute provided was not just the toolkit for how to go through this process, but they also provided technical resources and guidance along the way. And they did that two ways. First, they offered the services of Professor Arnab Chakraborty from the University of Illinois, who is now he's now a dean at the University of Utah. He was the author or the co-author of the planning process, and so it was great to have him there. And they also reached out for someone a little bit more local, the Great Ohio Policy Center, to help provide that on-hand technical expertise. Ultimately, though, it was up to the city to take and distill all this information, city staff to distill all this information and actually write this report, which was a culmination of about 9 months of effort. The report and the process that we went through during that 9 months, we went through basically 4 phases. We had the prepare stage, where we did a whole bunch of data analysis. That's spelled out in the report, from SWOT analyses. If you've been around the planners long enough, you probably heard the word SWOT analysis. That means strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We did stakeholder mapping. We did a lot of data polls. You'll see that data spread throughout the report. And we also conducted interviews with various stakeholders in the community related to affordable housing and housing affordability. And all of that data analysis and that prepare stage really led us to the question of, how do we ensure affordable housing for all Lakewood residents now and in the future? And that was the central focus of all of this work. From there, we went into the envision stage, where we had a workshop. It was a one-day workshop where we had 11 stakeholders representing a local community development corporation, local housing providers, an affordable housing developer, a nonprofit organization. We had the school district. We also had a major local mortgage lender with us. During that process, or during that workshop, we did a couple different things. First of all, we laid out a vision for what we want affordable housing to look like in the city. And then in the afternoon, this is where the exploratory scenario planning came to fruition. We examined basically 4 different scenarios and attempted to come up with actions that we would take to address all of those scenarios. And then the idea is, then when you have all of those actions, you identify those commonalities between the 4, and those are those actions of priority. So with that, I'll switch over to the report a little bit. That's just a quick outline of how we got to this point. Because then the last stage is the plan stage, which is the third stage is the plan stage, which is writing the report. And the last stage is reflect, which is we pushed out the report to all those stakeholders that we had been talking to, and they provided their comments, generally very positive comments, fortunately, that we captured our work accurately. So with that, the executive summary really, it disappeared. The executive summary does a really good job of just kind of laying out what we covered over the course of these months. First, with the key findings, so this is the results of all that data analysis. I can make this bigger if it's harder for others to see. Some of this you've heard us talk about already, like number 1, we've talked about the increase in sales or property valuations through sales since 2011, really, since the Great Recession started to have that uptick, and how we went from an average sale price of $115,000 to $295,000 last year. A little bit then about the rents have increased since January 2020 from $950 to over $1,500 just in 3 short years, which is a good thing for in some respects, but also is a threat in others, in that it affects housing affordability and affects who can have access to our community. One stat that we haven't talked much about is that we've seen a significant decrease in the amount of HUD subsidized units in our city. Prior to, in 2012, there were just over 1,500 units, and now there's just over 801 units in the city. So we've seen a significant decrease in the amount of subsidized units. And that could be a voucher. There's a number of different ways that could be, but generally it's a voucher in the city of Lakewood. Some of the other data, and we'll talk a little bit about number 3 here in a minute, but ultimately, the analysis leads us to, okay, how much housing supply do we have for various income categories? Where we found that we were deficient, especially on the rental side, there were On the rental side, we were deficient in two areas. One was for household incomes less than 30%, and for household incomes greater than 80%. On the affordability for owner-occupied structures, of course, homeownership really isn't for an income of 30% or less of the area median income. So where that was mainly, we found a deficiency in housing supply was for incomes greater than 80%. Someone had asked a question via email, where do we think that's, or when it's greater than 80%, where do we think that is? Is that the missing middle? Is it high end? Where is it? The answer is we don't have data. HUD doesn't track data to tell us beyond that 80% income threshold where that is. We suspect when we look at the totality of the data, when we look at what's happening in our market, we suspect it's probably there's a portion of that deficiency above 80% is in that middle income, so that 80 to 120, maybe that 80 to 150 range, as far as income levels. But ultimately, we don't have hard data to point at and say, yep, that's where the gap is. We have a lot of financial resources available to us. We are landlocked, and we are built out, so if creating new affordable housing opportunities in the community is difficult. But we're also, because we're landlocked, we're built out, because we're a bedroom community, we're more susceptible to market changes. And so those are some of the key findings that we identified through the data analysis. That then took us to the workshop. As I said, during the workshop, we had two tasks. The first one in the morning was to lay out a vision for affordable housing. And these are the 7 vision statements that the stakeholders came up with, from a community of inclusivity for income and social diversity, having affordable housing opportunities for our workforces, safe, clean housing. We want landlords to be accountable and also informed. We want them to welcome vouchers and other programs. We have nonprofit and for-profit developers that offer and help further affordable housing. We want ownership and rental opportunities for affordable housing, and that we're going to preserve the character of the Lakewood communities, Lakewood neighborhood when we do all of this. So that's the vision they laid out. The afternoon, then they looked at, and we can go to this in the questions just to kind of save some time for the background. We then analyzed those 4 different scenarios that were set out in the report. And those basically dealt with what happens if we are a high growth community, if we are a low growth community, if we have high affordability, if we have low affordability. That ultimately led to these recommendations. The actions led to these recommendations. I won't go through each one of these one by one. I'm just going to highlight what the topic was. You have the data then underneath, or the specific action items then underneath each one of them. But essentially, the actions that came out of this is that we need to support and maintain our infrastructure. We are a dense community. We've supported a population of 70,000 at one point. We're supporting a population of 50,000 right now. So we have the infrastructure to support more people, and more people can include affordable housing. We need to continuously evaluate our affordable housing programs. We need to educate, and that's landlords, that's credit count, that's everybody that's involved in the housing process. We need to support, maintain, enhance local regulations and enforcement. We have some really great programs we built over the years, but we need to continue to support those. We need to continue to grow those. We need to identify new support and opportunities. We talked a little bit about our tax abatement program and how we can help perhaps maybe analyze that and see if there's other things that we can do. How can we fund our land acquisition program? So those are the big buckets that different action items fell into that can be implemented over the next 5 years. With that, then there's a lot of course, detail that goes behind each one of those, but I'll pause so you all can ask questions, and we can go from there.
Thank you, Director. Any other comments from Director Vargo, or I see Mr. Story, or other members of the administration? Okay. Yes? Nothing?
Nothing. Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
I've got a couple questions and thoughts. So first, we sent some email questions. Before diving into those, it occurs to me, affordable housing, maybe we need some granularity. This is a comment to my colleagues as much as anything on what we're talking about here. So as we've come to learn through a number of hearings about this topic, there's low-income housing, there's affordable housing. Low income is, call it 30% and below. Affordable housing for sure is going to be 80 to 120 AMI. And both those categories are identified or called out in the executive summary as in a clear deficit. The other thing, I think, when people in the community speak of affordable housing, I suspect they're envisioning school-aged families. They may be envisioning people of all ages, which is the best way to think about it, because Lakewood's a community for all ages, for people who are renting and may be single of any age, people who are aging in place, empty nesters, and then also people who are buying a first home, starting a family, having a larger household, and then downsizing. So we want Lakewood to be a destination for and a home, a long-term home for all those categories. The challenging bottleneck, though, someone please correct me if I'm wrong, though, is going to be the 1- and 2-family homes, the school-age kids, that affects the character of the Lakewood Public School classroom. I think that's something people certainly have in mind. We do have a lot of, if we broke the affordable housing supply that we retain in our community by category, isn't it accurate to say that the lion's share that's going to serve retirees or people, I think 60 plus is the category of the Westerly. I know in the Gold Coast are a number of other buildings that are serving a similar population. So we may have better supplies. Is this an accurate statement? We may have better supplies of affordable housing units that serve people who are 1- and 2-family, or excuse me, 1- and 2-person households in their retirement years, because there's income qualifications and age qualifications on that. And then for everybody else, it might be a thinner supply. Is that an accurate breakdown?
Well, this study didn't get into the characteristics of the supply itself. Number of our units, so there's 28,808 housing units in the community. Of that, about almost 15,000 of those, based on the census, that are occupied are 2 or more units attached to each other. The remainder then are single family. And we all know about our split on we have more renters than we have owner-occupied units in the city. But as far as whether or not the housing units are better suited for empty nesters or for families, I think we have, the study didn't dive into that. I think anecdotally, though, we have a housing stock that is spread and can serve many different people at all times. I wouldn't necessarily say that we're short on family housing, because a lot of our housing is single family. A lot of our housing is duplexes that can support family housing. We have apartments that support and rental communities throughout our neighborhoods that support families. So I think we do have a broad spectrum of housing types that can support a broad spectrum of family types. But this report didn't dive into that detail as it wasn't envisioned to.
Okay, so I mean, that's a question for colleagues. Maybe, I know we don't have a ton of time today, because I think we have, okay, we do have an hour, good. I thought we were going to have to wrap up
We have an hour.
in moments. At 7 o'clock, we've got a different committee meeting. But, when we talk in the community, and I think all council members, as I've gathered, I'm looking at some of my colleagues who've been particularly vocal about this. You've talked around the community. I think all of us are sincerely trying to be responsive to the feedback that we're getting. But if we get specific and granular about what tools are realistically available to us, what in a legal sense and in a budgetary sense, and what those tools can accomplish, what I suspect we're going to find is that, for example, if we found an affordable housing developer, the economics are going to encourage them to do a multifamily, 50-plus unit development, and that likely is going to serve 60, 55-year-old and plus, or 60 plus, and those are going to be 1- and 2-person apartments. So that's important, and that's really going to be helpful to moving the needle on affordable housing supply. That would not, though, address some of the other family category types that I think people have in mind. So I'm just inviting us to think this through a little bit, and if council or the community has a clear priority in one or more of these areas, we're going to have to either figure out how to move the needle or find new resources. Mr. Baker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Director Leininger, I know one of the recommendations of this report is the whole, anyone in the R2 district, unlocking essentially the ability to make a single into a double. We referred that to Planning Commission as well as council, and I'm just curious as to if we could have an update on that point. And then I have another question as well, but just curious as to that.
I do. So at the meeting earlier this month, the Planning Commission, after several months of conversation with the Planning Commission, they had some recommended changes to how we unlock the R2 zoning. We went back and forth on some different ideas, and ultimately then earlier this month, they recommended City Council approve the recommendations as they're putting forth. We're working with the law department. We have to tweak some of the language. We have to actually add, because of some changes that happened on the floor, we actually have to add some additional amendments into it. But they did move it out to allow basically if you have a single family dwelling in the R2 district, which is a two-family zoning district, if you only have a single family, which is about a large number, I don't remember the exact number, a large number of those units that are zoned R2, you will have the ability to add an accessory dwelling to your property, whether that's attached, detached, above a garage, or even attached to a garage. They've opened that up to make that possible. There's some rules and regulations pertaining to that to help protect home ownership, to help protect the character of a neighborhood. But they did move that forward. I think the recommendations are coming out are a lot more permissive than when we started, and what was referred out. But I think they also accomplish all the goals that we were trying to accomplish when we went down this path.
Thank you. And then secondly, there's some reference to tax abatement ability to spur some of this affordable housing. I know we already adjusted our CRA a couple of years ago, a previous council, to allow, for some percentage of units in new developments. Are there any other tools that would be available? They kind of obliquely reference it, but just curious if there's any detail.
So when we talked about the tax, so there are other tools available, but as it pertains to the tax abatement program, as you noted, we have what's called a pre-1994 CRA, Community Reinvestment Area. The reason that's important is the state law has changed now multiple times since 1994 to be more restrictive in the sense of what type and how long of a tax abatement you can offer for various projects. Pre-1994, you could offer 15 years, 100% tax abatement on the improved value, no questions asked. If you did what was being asked of you, or what the ordinance laid out, you got a 15-year, 100% tax abatement, and you could amend that ordinance twice. We did recently amend it in 2019 to allow the multifamily development, larger scale multifamily developments of 100 units or more to be able to receive a tax abatement if 20% of those units were made affordable. The discussion that went through this process is, well, that's great, that captures a lot of units, but in only a few projects. So is there an opportunity for us to potentially offer that to smaller projects? Because that's really kind of Lakewood's bread and butter of the smaller projects. And we all believe that the answer is yes, but we need to work with with our law department, probably with some outside counsel, to understand the impacts of if we do that. We may lose the ability to offer the 15-year 100% tax abatement, or can we do those in project by project basis and then create separate CRAs over those individual properties? That may be another option. So we have some work we need to do on our side to understand if we can make that tool more useful throughout the community rather than 3 or 4 projects in the community. But then the state also has programs, LIHTC, which is low-income housing tax credits. That's the most common financing vehicle for affordable housing. They do that for non-senior and then for senior housing. We have a couple examples of those projects with the Westerly, things that LSC Service Corporation have in the community. Those are LIHTC projects. So there are funding sources from there. That's the most common one beyond the tax abatement. And really the one that's probably needed, especially when we're talking about very low-income housing, that 30% where we have a threshold of, or where we have a deficit, you need LIHTC dollars. Tax abatement's not going to carry the weight. A lot of times those are nonprofit developers anyway, so they're not paying property tax, so the tax abatement isn't really beneficial. But that's where the LIHTC is helpful.
And then there's some reference to, I think it's like a city program assisting first-time home buyers. The limit is $150,000, I believe. Is the administration open to moving that up? What fiscal impact would that have? Have you looked at that?
So yes, we would like to move that up. However, we're not the deciders of whether or not we can move that up. It's based on a housing study that is conducted at the county level. We've had conversations both individually as the city of Lakewood as well as in the First Suburbs Consortium about having conversations with the County Development Office about re-examining or conducting a new market analysis to rescale that number from 150 to something more reasonable based on today's market. We've had productive conversations, but there hasn't been any action to move that forward. But that's the only way to move that forward is through that housing study.
This doesn't relate to affordable housing, but also when you have those discussions, the help loan from 250, moving that higher would be helpful, I think, to investment in our housing stock. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Baker. What's the 150 and 250? Is that percent AMI, or what are we talking about?
So the 150 so we have a first-time home buyer program.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who wants to buy a home in Lakewood and meets the income qualifications, 80% or less of the area median income, they are eligible for a down payment assistance. I don't remember the exact number, but they're eligible for down payment assistance. One of the conditions of it, beyond just the income restriction, is that the purchase price of the home cannot exceed, I think it's $149,900.
Okay.
$149,900.
And then the 250, you're talking about same thing, but for a help loan.
Yes.
Yeah, the help loan is available to anyone non-income restricted in the county,
But
whose house value on the auditor's website is under 250.
Okay.
You can take out essentially a low-interest loan to improve your home.
and those are all county tools, is your point, Director Leininger?
One's a county tool. The help loan is a
Right.
county tool. The other is a county-led initiative
County-led.
because it deals with the market analysis for the
Okay.
entire county.
And then on top of that, there's a HUD determination of, I think, of AMI and related to AMI, which is going to drive the categories. And so we've talked for years about making the argument, I think accurately so, that in Lakewood, the cost of living has been increasing and probably never originally was very keyed to the average across the market basket region. And it seems to me that, I think as is called out in your action items, that we've got some advocacy to do in front of us to talk to our partners at the federal and county levels. And the county, as we've been saying, is really kind of an agency or a facilitator of federal programs where you advocate for changes. So I'd be very happy as a committee member here, committee chair, to participate in some advocacy. I also think we have friends in county government. We also have friends in federal government. We don't have to be shy at all. And the goal that we are trying to accomplish here is to make Lakewood more accessible, not less accessible to all people. So I would think there would be interest and welcome open arms to that kind of a conversation. I'd love to do it. Now, I think most appropriately, that's led by the mayor, and city council would come along as partners to the mayor. But I'd be eager for that, and I think we could be showing some thoughtful leadership in the region if we were to drive those conversations.
Sure.
What do you think?
Absolutely.
Could we do it this year or early next?
Early next would be best.
Okay, any other council members? Councilwoman Keppel?
Thanks. A lot of good information in this report. I had a question about, it's in the executive summary and then it goes into more detail, but how is that deficit, I know it mentions that it comes from a federal study, but how is it determined exactly how many units Lakewood were in the deficit for the 30% median income and for the 80%? I think it was 1,500 for 30 and 4,700 80, and then also 80% or more is a big range, right? Is that anything, anything over 80%? So we're talking about north of Lake Avenue homes plus?
Sure,
Okay.
absolutely.
So how is that number determined, what the deficit would be?
So this is where Greater Ohio Policy Center was a huge resource for us. They really helped spearhead this data analysis because they've done it in other communities. And so what they've done is they've taken a combination of the data that's shown the housing cost burden or that information that you see on these slides or later in the report. They've combined that with some census data, and there's a calculation that they go through that generates based on estimated information that we get from HUD, based on then census data, where these surpluses and deficits exist. It was to nobody's surprise when we're dealing with rental housing, based on what we're seeing in the marketplace, it was to nobody's surprise that this is where we saw our deficit in that very low income category. It was surprising, actually in both categories, whether it's for renters or for owner-occupied structures, how large the deficit was in that 80% or greater category. HUD, because HUD really, by acts of Congress, only deals with households at income less than 80% of the area median income, doesn't track data beyond 80%. So we don't have a good resource to go and then zero in on that 4,764 deficit or that over 6,000 unit deficit to understand where is that. It's probably scattered throughout that entire, everything from 80 and beyond. We suspect, though, it's probably, there's bubbles throughout that. And we suspect there's probably a missing middle bubble. When we look at our unit types, when we look at the age of our population, for example, a lot of the owner-occupied homes that are less than 50% of the area median income, it's probably seniors that have limited income. They're showing up in that category. And when you look at all of these different categories, you look at the life cycle of housing and the kind of the cycle that we're going through, this data is probably going to change a lot over the next couple of years, and it catches up to what's happened over the last 5 years with steep increases in rent rates, with steep increases in valuations or sale prices. Where we have a surplus of housing right now in that 30 to 80 range, and that's in the renter and in the owner occupied, that's probably going to move out and up into that 80% or greater category. And so those surpluses will then help pull this number down. So that was one of the other questions I received via email. Some of that will happen naturally just through conversions.
Which number?
So what we suspect is going to be happening is that where we have a surplus of units,
Yep.
that 30 to 80% range, we're seeing a lot of transition in those units, both in the renter and in the owner occupancy. As those units transition, those will start to, we think, whittle away at this deficit at the greater than 80% number. What's also going to happen, though, except for maybe units that are aging and still in that decline, and their rents are going to either probably not decline, but they'll hold flat or flatter. This is the concerning area on the rental side, because we had units that were built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, probably not invested in over those 40, 50 years. Lava hot housing market where buildings were selling at record prices, buildings that now need lots of renovation, maybe unit owners that are just looking to get out, they sell at a high price. Now, the new owner wants to invest in it because they just bought at a high price, so the rent rates that are in that building can't support the high rent or the high price they just paid. Make that investment, and now the rents suddenly double overnight. And we've seen that on a number of properties throughout the community. Trish Rooney, who was part of this, she's part of LCSC, or executive director for LCSC. She's having a really hard time. Her mission is always to try to find people who are displaced or are under the threat of displacement, to find them housing in Lakewood. And that's that 30% or lower income level generally. It's hard to find places now in Lakewood. You heard her say that in part of previous testimony she gave with the council committees. So there's a lot to these numbers when you look at, you see, wow, there's a deficit of almost 10,000 units for greater than 80%. There's a lot of moving pieces within that, and there's a lot of data we don't have that would maybe help us focus a little bit, and we just don't have that data.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think looking at some of these too is that sort of anecdotal point, as I hear that a lot from residents about, they want their apartment cleaned up, but they're scared that if it's cleaned up too much, their rent's going to go up. And so it's kind of a catch-22. I also wanted to follow up with just generally with this. So there's a lot of data, there's some ideas, there's a schedule at the end of following through on this. So I kind of wanted to ask a little bit about process here. Was this vision, these points, adopted in any sort of formal way by the stakeholders who participated? I don't believe, we've formally adopted it per se as a city, but I'm seeing some of this work implemented. I mean, we've had that legislation about unlocking the, so what is the process for this? Is there, it's probably falling on you, but is someone particularly stewarding this to be like, we're going to make sure we're doing these things? How is this moving forward?
In terms of process, the stakeholders did not have a formal adoption process, but they were clearly part of the process. And then in that reflect stage, that's when the draft of this report was pushed out to them, and they were all given an opportunity to provide comment, suggest changes, propose additional things that maybe came to light after the meeting. So they all had an opportunity to, I guess, informally give their approval or their acceptance of the document. In terms of formal action by the city, since this is more of an action report, yes, there was a planning process that took place. Unlike a formal plan, like we have the ADA plan in front of council this evening, this was more of a report out of a process that we had. So we didn't view this as having a formal action by city council. This really just helps inform our actions as we move forward, as we think about different programs, as we start to prioritize things in budgets. So that's how we're viewing that. In terms of who's responsible for this, yes, it's the Planning and Community Development Department, myself, Dan Wyman, and Marty Castelletti, our program manager. The rest of the planning staff does have their hands in this at various points and for various topics, but those are the two primarily, and I guess three if you count me, that are responsible for carrying this forward as we move ahead. Because a lot of this will tie into other programs that we do, like comprehensive rewrite the zoning code. That's something we want to get out the door later this year. Dan and Marty aren't going to help with that. They're focusing on the grants and the programs. So there a lot of people all hands on deck when it comes to this topic.
Thanks. And one of the things, and there was about educating landlords about vouchers. Is that happening now in the landlord training session? I know I see that it's on here as one of the recommendations?
So, yes, now that the landlord trains are getting scheduled, actually, we're getting ready to start planning for what it will be the topics this year. Carrie Pleasance, who's with the Fair Housing Rights and Research Center, she was part of our stakeholder group. We're going to reach out just as a friendly reminder, hey, this is a good time for us to not just talk about tenants' rights, but let's also talk about, hey, these vouchers are available, this is what this means, and that this is educate them a little bit on what that process is, and that this is guaranteed money for a potential landlord, or for a landlord if they have a potential voucher that walks into their door. So ultimately, for just a point of clarification, so when someone who is of lower income is eligible for a housing voucher, they apply through HUD, they're able to take that to any unit that they can. It's ultimately up to the landlords whether or not they accept that voucher. We know that there's some landlords that do welcome them and appreciate that guaranteed source of income, but there are some additional steps that they have to go through in order to make sure that that person qualifies, that the unit qualifies to receive those funds.
Yeah. So another one, thank you for that. And I'd be interested in, we've talked some about, some of the barriers for landlords in Lakewood who are small business owners. Maybe they rent out the other half of their duplex. It's hard to weather the potential waiting period of vouchers, that there may be some creative solutions that we can help to incentivize that and help them navigate those challenges. So I'd be interested in continuing that conversation. I did want to ask too, there's on page 5, there's a comment about population loss has been stabilizing over the last decade and is projected to fully stabilize with current housing development projects. I wonder if you could explain a little bit more, like stabilize how, as in we're going to hit 51,000 and stay there for the next 10 years, or it's going to go up, or you shed a little more light on what stabilize means. That's okay. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so when we talk about stabilization in terms of this document, we are talking about the population loss. And so since 1970, probably somewhere in the mid-70s is actually when we peaked, or in the early 70s when we peaked. You can see on this graph, and the city has lost about 20,000 people. Estimates and projections still have us losing population, but it has steadily been getting slower and slower and slower. We have over 600 multifamily units that are in the pipeline of some order, whether it's the Sola project, whether it's the Casto and the Downtown project, or the Board of Education, Liberty Development on that project. We have a bunch of housing that's getting ripe to come to market. When that comes to market, yeah, there will be some moving around of people within Lakewood, but we'll also then backfilling a lot of those spaces with people from outside Lakewood. So that's when we expect that population loss to now stop. And I don't think it's ever going to go, we don't think it's going to go up unless we suddenly just start having more babies, because that's the main reason why we've lost a lot of our houses, or a lot of our population, just through smaller family size. We'll at least probably stick around that 50,000 people population number. What's that?
Some of us up here are doing our best with repopulating with kids, yeah.
Repopulate Lakewood, it should be a campaign.
I know Mr. Scheckner has a few questions. Before we jump into that, just a couple clarifying points. Director Leininger, you said when units transition after the next data collection point, this is 2019 data, we're going to get new data soon, you think the middle tiers of 30 to 50 and 50 to 80 are going to transition probably upwards for the large part. What does transition mean? Does that mean the property is selling and transferring for a higher price, mostly?
A higher price, so then then the data will reflect that you have someone of higher income in that unit, and so.
So when so we presume that the property is being invested in, but really what's driving it is prices are going up, and once the higher price transfer happens, the new owner wants to capture back the investment.
It's twofold. It's in part just a natural, what's happening in the market. So
Yep.
even without investment.
Okay.
People are making money, or the property valuation's going up. But then you add that investment, and you're now increasing even more.
100%. And when we're successful at getting a shoreline restoration and erosion control and lake access project at the Gold Coast, that's going to also add value, right, without any of the units.
Tech value.
The other, can you go back to those charts? I'm confused by the term owner. There's a rental chart on the supply change. In that one, it says supply of rental housing units, affordable units is the top row, second row, total owners.
Oh, that should say renters.
Okay, so that should say total renters, so therefore the deficit is
I apologize, yeah.
no problem. And then the same thing goes to the next below. So
That should be owners.
we literally have 2,500 units. How come those two things aren't married up? Okay, you don't have that because
Oh,
the
it's
two
owner.
columns.
Owner versus, so these are
Yeah.
renters. And these are
Yeah, I
renter
understand.
occupied units, these are owner occupied
But
units.
the column from the top, I see what you're saying. There's
so
a deficit there's no 30% and below on the owner
Correct.
occupied.
There might have been some numbers there, but they were so minuscule that GOPC just rolled them into the less than 50%.
Okay, so the point is that there's more supply than demand for the middle categories, and they're on the end ones, there's more demand than supply. Okay, and then finally, what income categories would a voucher cover? 30% and below? Maybe 50% and below, or do we?
That, I am not a voucher expert. I believe it's 80% or below.
Okay.
But I
By
would be-
statute,
I would
but
be
by
speculating.
practicality, the county has a waiting list, I know. The agencies that, all right, that would be interesting to know. And I would answer Councilwoman Keppel's question, who's tracking this, who's setting policy on this? I would propose that this committee does so, because it's important enough, and it needs to be prioritized enough. You know, I think if we're doing our jobs, we have to prioritize this in terms of policy and just in visibility. And if there's need for more resources, which there very well could be, that's part of the city council's job in our budget process. That's aspirational in that latter category, but for sure, if we're going to make some very big decisions about how we're going to steer the housing supply to the degree that we can, which is difficult because mostly it's privately owned, I think we've got to be engaged. Mr. Shackner, thanks for your patience. Do you want to dive in?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. Is there any talk about, like, conversation about filtering as in recent and expected housing developments in Lakewood? They talk about, of course, downtown development site, the former Spitzer site, Barry Buick site. The fact that an increase of altogether maybe 400 to 100 units on how that would impact rental prices if people, let's say, even if you built senior housing, right, and you had some people move around in Lakewood that are aging out of their own homes and moving into senior housing, how that makes more single or multifamily housing available for people who want to live here, and two, like you stated earlier, when I talk to people at the doors and their concern is about developments happening, it's like, oh, that's something I can't afford. Oh, is the purpose, or are developers looking to just move people around who already live in Lakewood, or is that more of drawing people that don't necessarily live here yet into the community? Then I have a follow-up.
So I don't know that the developers are necessarily focused on whether or not the people are relocating within Lakewood or coming from outside. They're trying to build a project, especially a for-profit developer we're talking about, is building a project that can maximize the amount of rent per square foot in that unit, regardless of where that person comes from. In terms of what does that do to the rent rates, this report didn't contemplate that. Based on past studies we've done, generally when you have demand, which in this case, most of those new projects are going to be affecting that that greater than 80%, well, they are going to be affecting that greater than 80% deficit. You meet demand with supply. So hopefully that will have, and it's going to be hard to track this, but hopefully it'll have some effect on slowing at least the rent rate increases that we've been seeing, but it's speculative.
And right, is it fair to say that we have apartments currently and maybe multifamily units that are being rented that are probably higher than the quality of the housing should probably get in terms of rent?
I would assume.
And if that's true, and if somebody could get possibly for equal amount or a little bit more, move into a newly built apartment or rent, is there any research or any thought about how that would impact rental prices for those type of homes or units?
Well, it'll make it harder for them to compete at that rent rate. So they're going to have to do one of two things. They're going to have to adjust their rent rate, or they're going to have to go and invest in their property to help support keeping that rent. That's when you hear from Casto, when you hear from Solov, when they've been in front of you all in the past, is the amenities, the finishes, all of that's very important because that helps them command the highest rent that they can get on the market.
Mm-hmm. So it could create somewhat of an equilibrium of what you actually get, what you pay for, essentially.
Essentially.
And I'm looking through the report. I'm looking through the report and talking about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And of course, they're supposed to be, diametrically opposed to each other. But it's like with strengths, or it's also its greatest threat. The demand and desire really can push people out and limit who can get in. I mean, the only real way to control that is make this a worse place to live, right? I mean,
It's not the goal.
right. It's not the goal, but that would lower prices.
Yes.
What I'm having a difficult time with, and I think when I have conversations with people, I mean, they're talking about rent, they're talking about property taxes, even though the city's only asked for 17.4 mils, which is per $1,000, like $17, compared to the school district, which takes 46 mils, and the county, which is like 28, somewhere around there. I mean, it's like we're really only 20% of your property tax bill. If we zeroed it out, you're still paying a significant amount in property taxes, and it's because everybody keeps voting for. It's good, they keep voting for the levies, but I mean, we're not raising their property taxes. People are voting for increased property taxes. But in terms of their rents getting higher, or things of that nature, and things being built, but it's not for rents that they could afford. I went on a tangent, but I think the thought that people have of filtering is that new construction eventually becomes old construction. And sure, prices are going to be elevated for a certain point until those become tired 10, 15, 20 years. There's no magic bullet here. And without creating some sort of program that deeply subsidizes, which, unless there's another round of ARPA-type funding, is there any realistic way the city, within its budget, can essentially be a developer on one of its pieces of property, contract for professional service of a general contractor to build the development that is basically for cost?
So could we? Sure. Are we set up to do that? No. There's other people that are better at doing that, like the the CHNs of the world, the CHMA, the CMHAs. There's nonprofit developers that build that product. They know how to work the LIHTC system. They know how to. They have a ready-made product to do that. It would be very challenging for the city to step into that, and probably be a very costly exercise for the city to go into that. But that's where, then we talked a little bit about this, where we do have some properties, and not that every property should necessarily be an affordable housing property, where we do have some opportunities, we should take advantage of those where it makes sense. And how do we get to that? There's a lot of different ways we can get there, whether it's RFP, RFQ, RFP, whether we just go to a broker and let everybody kind of compete for it. Because a lot of times what happens is we put out an RFP, we have very limited set of eyes and audience that we're reaching. A broker can hit a much wider audience than we can. So there's different ways for us to do that. I think there's people that are already doing that in and around Lakewood. And be better to tap them on the shoulder, to let them do what they're good at, and we'll do what we're good at, which probably isn't building houses.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Schachner. You hit on a good pair of points, and I've forgotten one of them, but I heard the other one, which is expand supply. That could have a equilibrium recalibration effect on prices and/or quality, or probably some of both. There was another point in there. I'll have to listen to the videotape to recall, but we're swarming on the issue. Director Leininger, is there a LIHTC non-senior developer in the region, and are any of those entities looking at Lakewood?
So they're in the region. We have called and introduced. We've cold called those types of developers, introduced ourselves, just to let them know that we're here, and we have properties that come available, most of which have built buildings or have buildings on them, and not greenfields like a lot of them look for. But yes, they do exist, and we're doing the best that we can to make sure that they know that Lakewood's here and is a willing partner.
Well, maybe this committee can work with the administration on that. I know we did some relationship development and tours with the hospital developer, Casto, early on. Now that was kind of they were educating us about their work, but we could do the same in reverse with some of those. Is LIHTC, which income band would you describe LIHTC as kind of addressing? Is that 80% and below?
They kind of go through the band.
They can do any of them?
They can, but generally you'll see them in LIHTC in the 50% or below.
Okay.
And then really, it's about the only thing you have available.
And
the 30%
and economically, the economics of a project, let's say it's a rehab, well, I don't know. Are they 8 suiters, 4 suiters? Do they have to be 40 suiters? Could be anything.
LIHTC's not that specific.
Well, I know, not the criteria, but the business model in practical terms, what's the opportunity in Lakewood, since we're built out and probably talking a rehab with the occasional demo and rebuild for a former commercial property. We don't have greenfields, et cetera, right? So realistically,
It's an apartment building.
okay. Of what size? How many units?
Depends on the finances behind the project and what our zone, there's a combination of factors that go into that.
You're probably not going to get a double, right? Or a 4-suiter.
Well, no, not for LIHTC dollars.
Okay,
no.
so we're talking 20 plus, 50 plus?
Yeah, the magic number, it depends on which developer you talk to, because some of it just depends on their business model.
Okay.
Some of them are looking for the larger scale projects where it's 50 plus. Others are in that 20 to 40 range.
We probably need to have conversations
do.
with both of those categories. And I think the councilman's point, what tool sets can we develop? What resources can the city engage? It may not be a direct subsidy, but it could be what you and Councilman Baker were describing earlier with the tax abatement approach, that tool, which typically, tax abatements, I think, have been to attract economic stimulus, major, shopping centers and big projects and the like, but kind of we're contemplating a different direction, which is to invest in accessibility and affordability, which is, I think, laudable. So I look forward to learning. I know we're out of time. The chairman to my left, your right, is showing his patience. Don't want to impose much more on that. The next item on the agenda we'll have to bring back, but is that at all contemplate, in the terms, I don't think I see any conditions on the proposed brokerage for those properties. We could connect those 5 single-family homes to affordable housing strategy. Have we thought of that? Are we contemplating that?
So we have thought about that. We've actually had prior discussions when we sold those original 5 or 6 properties. Sorry, I'm trying to get to a map. when we sold these properties that are outlined here in red, when we talked about that, we said, look, out of all of these, I think there's 10 properties here total, and one of them being a vacant lot. We committed to making 3 of those for affordable housing purposes. The reason we did that is because you have to, not every house is suitable for someone of lower income to be able to own, operate, and maintain. And the ordinance that's in front of you does not have specific language because we want to work with a broker to figure out which of these makes the most sense. What type of deal can we put together to attract?
Okay, so the
Lower
green,
income.
the green properties on this slide would be addressed in the proposed ordinance
Correct.
or resolution, and the
These are already sold.
ordinance, and the red are already sold, and the answer is maybe, or that's a live conversation, but we don't know for sure. Want to study it a little bit more?
1472 is a foreshore because
Okay.
the city is investing our home dollars into that property.
Okay,
So that property, once the renovation is complete, it'll sell for not more than $149,900 to someone of 80% or lower area median income,
Okay.
depending on the number of people in their household.
and the other ones are a maybe.
The others, what we think are make the most sense, 1476, because we don't have enough funds to put into all these projects. 1476 is probably just too big of a project for home. And then these might make sense for someone in that missing middle. Again, remember that study just said we have a surplus in that between 30 and 80%. But where these 2 properties might make sense, or if we have another developer that wants to do affordable housing, like a Habitat or someone like that, either of these 2 properties could make sense for that lower income. And by lower, I mean anywhere from 120 or 150% or below, not necessarily 80% or below.
Okay. Why don't we, I do see next week, 1 week from tonight, we've got this same ordinance noticed, so we pledged to get it disposed of prior to our next council meeting. That'll be November 6th, I believe. So thank you for the time and the explanation. Any parting comments by my colleagues? Okay, thanks for allowing us to cram in 3 hours worth of content into 1 hour plus. I think it's interesting and important work, and I look forward to continued work in good faith with the with the administration and the community. Actually, there is one public comment on the proposed ordinance. Maybe we could retain that for the next council meeting. Okay, so that we don't lose that public comment. All right, thanks everyone. Without objection, Housing Committee is adjourned.